I think we can start. Thank you so much for being here. So today, our today's speaker is João Pereira dos Santos. He is currently a researcher at Queen Mary University of London with Maria Curie-Skłodowska Fellowship. He's also assistant professor at University of Lisbon. And he has finished his PhD in 2019, and since then he has published 2021. And since then he has published a lot of papers. So he's a very productive researcher in journals such as European Economic Review, 2 Times, Journal of Urban Economics, Journal of Economic Geography, Regional Science and Urban Economics, among many others. So he's a very productive researcher. His research interests includes mostly political and public economy, also urban economics and economic history. And we took advantage that João was yesterday in Madrid taking part in the defense of a PhD student of Diego Puga at Senfi, and then we were able to invite him here to UREV. He's actually for the second time presenting at UREV, so he was presenting already once as a PhD student at a WIPE workshop. However, it was online, so he was never able to be here in person. So, João, we are very happy to have you here, and the stage is yours. Thank you so much.
Thanks, David, and thank you so much for having me. So, I'm going to present a joint paper with 2 PhD students. So, it's the very first time that we are presenting this paper, so any fault is just my own, and this is the perfect time to have some feedback from you, so perfect time to have your feedback. It's more than welcome. So what we are talking about, we will try to understand and to shed light on a few things related with public support during COVID. And what we know from this growing literature now is that the US and Europe took very different approaches. So while the US basically decided to subsidize workers through very generous unemployment schemes, so Europe decided, so the goal was to keep the matching process between firms and workers, and there were more incentives related with furlough, layoff, short time subsidies to keep this matching during the peak of the pandemic. So, but for small countries such as Portugal and for other countries with small firms, we know that entrepreneurs in these areas, so they were not sufficiently covered because they have some subsidies to pay for their workers. But if you are the main owner of a firm, if you started this firm for a few years ago and your wage is basically profit from this firm, you have some fixed costs to cover, but you don't have any employment because maybe the state forced you to close down completely during COVID. So what we are trying to do here, we are trying to analyze one particular program, very generous as you will see, that was implemented after this first wave of layoff schemes and short time effects, and we try to understand if this was effective. And the program is called APOIAR, which in Portuguese literally means to support. And so it was set, I'll tell you more about it in a second, but it was set at the end of 2020. And it's non-repayable, it's cash flow to firms to keep them afloat. And in some particular sectors, as you can see, and this was very generous, thanks to European funds. So the paid incentive was over 1.2 billion for these firms, and if we compare with the layoff scheme in Portugal at the same time, it was slightly less. So there was a need. The government acted or reacted late, but they understood that they needed to also provide some support to entrepreneurs and to firms and to help with fixed costs, not just with employment, but with other things like rents and so on. And then we are trying to understand what happened.
Summary, absolutely.
Okay, so very fast on the institutional context. So Portugal, such as Spain, so we were particularly hit by the pandemic. So there was a severe economic contraction in 2020, and this is mainly due by the fact that Portugal, as Spain, it's a very the touristic sector is very important. So tourism is very important, and it basically collapsed during this period. And early in 2020, such as in many other countries, there was a first wave of support that included moratorium on debt and rental payments, credit lines, some deferred tax payments, so also some, and this is the most important part, these non-refundable wage subsidies, so the paid furlough or layoff scheme. So this is the first wave to set the stage. But then later in that year, the government basically understood that we needed to also provide some support to business owners. So there's this paper in the European Economic Review analyzing the impacts of this first wave of support. And we can see that, yeah, there is some heterogeneity depending on how productive the firm was before the shock. There is some heterogeneity depending on so if they are likely or not to take government support, the rise in low so what they find is that apparently this first wave of support was sufficient to not to have to keep firms afloat, and there was not a significant so firms survived in 2020, so there is not a lot of attrition and also not heterogeneous attrition, at least in this first. So where do we think they will contribute in this paper? So regarding these first the support during COVID, there is a growing literature, especially for the US, with the case of subsidies to firms. The main important subsidy in the US was the Paycheck Protection Program, the PPP, and basically this was a little bit different in the sense that it was non-repayable in the condition that firms had to keep employment, at least for a certain number of months. Okay? In Europe, these conditions were quite different, and it was not at all the case in Portugal. So we are trying to provide something that contributes to this literature on the public support on firm performance, and we argue that we have a very neat causal evidence on the impact of these policies, and I'll try to tell you why. And also we think that this type of there is some wave of work, but looking at the Great Recession, with short-term the effects of short-term work in Europe during the Great Recession, and there is some mixed results. And this is what we are trying to see. Is it enough to compensate for labor, or do we also have to compensate capital somehow?
Can you tell us something about the size of the subsidy in US comparable with Portugal? So were there like a lot of differences, or it was just the only difference was that you had to keep the employment, or?
So if we divide per workers, given that Portuguese firms are very small, it's even higher in Portugal. I'll give you a few numbers on it.
Okay.
So on that respect, so I'll show you the first stage of what we have. So how much money are we talking about? Okay, so just a few more words on this APOIAR program. So they were targeting things related with wholesale. So the sectors were wholesalers, retailers, and of course tourism. So think about these as hotels, restaurants, bars that were closed throughout the period, and so on and so forth. And there are two key dates here. So the first one is in November 2020. That's when this program was announced and effective. It was very quick. Once they thought they needed to act, they were very quick. And it was so aimed at micro and small enterprises that had turnover losses bigger than 25% between January and September 2020. So things that were already, things that had already happened, and these transactions were communicated to the tax authority before. So if the year-on-year difference between January and September 2020 and January-September 2019 was bigger than 25%, then the firm were eligible to get this money. And then this program was expanded a few months later. Now the rule is that it's not just the first 3 quarters or the comparison between these 3 quarters, but the whole year. So they were comparing 2020 with 2019. If the loss that you reported to the tax authority was bigger than 25%, you get the subsidy. So what were the and at that time it was even more generous. So what were the requirements? So firms should have no debts to the Social Security and to the fiscal authority, and they cannot fire workers for a little while after, or, very important, distribute dividends to shareholders. So it was very simple online application process. So basically the tax already had all the data that they needed to make the decision. So it was just, I want to grab these funds. Yes, I go to the tax authority website. I claim that I'm eligible. The tax authority would pay immediately, and then they would check, and they checked, and sometimes they had to get money back. But it was very fast. And now, just a little bit on here. So the rules were slightly different, of course. For firms starting in 2000 or during 2019, you don't have a full or a fair comparison in year to year. So the rules were slightly different for startups, were slightly different for self-entrepreneurs, and in November they were not settled for medium and large firms, but in January yes. So we are excluding all of this from from our approach. Still, it's like more than 80% of the Portuguese firms and for the Portuguese employment at them in these sectors. Okay, so the data, we combine several administrative data sets, basically covering the universe of firms and workers and support. So we have a panel data from 2019, so before and to 2022, and next month 2023, hopefully, with information on several characteristics of firms, so we know the location, the sector, and so on, and the subsidies. So let me tell you briefly about these data sets. The first one is quite new. It's called e-fatura, that is basically invoice system. So all the transactions in the country, firm to firm or firm to consumer, all transactions in the country, as they are reported to the tax authority, and the ones that were decided on for you to get eligible to this subsidy. So we have all the transactions between firms in the country, public and private. Then we have balance sheet data. So we have a lot of information on profits, workforce, sales, types of investments, and all of that. That's what we will exploit. And we can also combine with the administrative data from the program itself, so know exactly how much money, so if they applied, and then we know exactly how much money they got from this support. So just let me be, so what we are looking here is just small, and so we are looking at micro and small firms. So we exclude those that are not micro and small. We exclude firms in non-eligible sectors, and also firms in the islands of Madeira and Açores, and firms that a priori didn't have positive turnover, equity, and so on. They were excluded from the program by the rule. Okay, so just a little bit on descriptives of what we are talking about here. So we are talking about small firms where the business owner is basically he has no wage from this activity. And so the median firm has 3 employees. So of course if we are talking about small to medium firms, we are talking about firms between 1 and 24 workers. And so it's a very small firm, not very high turnover, but super important for the business owner. So the assets and so on, we know all that. So what sectors are we talking about? So the main sectors is retail and wholesale trade. And then of course the other part is related with tourism, so hotels, restaurants, bars, and so on. But there's also some other consulting firms and manufacturing that were forced to shut down. Dentists were forced to shut down at that time. And all of this was covered by this program. Okay, so what do we do? So we are trying to exploit these 25% threshold to use a regression discontinuity design. So I'm going to show you results both for the sharp and for the fuzzy approaches in the sharp RDD, in the RDD. So the sharp meaning that, so it's the sharp is giving us the intention to treat effect, right? The intention to treat in a sense that the state intentionally wanted to treat every firm, but not all firms applied. And then the sharp, it's going to be conditional on you applying how much money you got and what was the effect per euro on a series of outcomes. So the baseline results with the RDD are going to show you a polynomial of order 2, sorry for that, triangular kernel function, and the bandwidth is the optimal, the Cattaneo, canonical, and Teutoonic. But we have now a big appendix with the imbands and so on. The eligibility criteria, it's going to be if you have a decrease in turnover in these two, between the 4 months and the 12 months. If you have a decrease, because there was so let me just recall, there was a part of that was announced in 2020, a part that was announced in 2021. But the good thing is that when they were announced, it's for things that we had already reported to the tax authority. So there's no manipulation, as I'll show you. The good thing about the RDD is that there are a few assumptions, but we can clearly show empirical evidence for that. There's someone calling from behind.
Just keep going.
I can keep going?
On microphone.
Okay, no problem. So, so the turnover is going to be if you had access, if you were eligible in at least one of these approaches, and we are going to compare. So firms that had a decrease of 25.1 with firms that had a decrease of 24.9 and were not eligible to the treatment. Yes, please.
Yeah, so you were already mentioning, to anticipate my question. So what is the fiscal year in Portugal, right?
What is that? Sorry?
The fiscal year. So these enterprises already have submitted their taxes, so they can, right, arguably not change the report, which is amazing for your design. Do you see claims like exposed? Like some companies trying?
They could not do it, but I'll show you the McCrary test to make sure that there is no manipulation. It's the next slide.
Yeah.
Then just to make sure that other things that might related. So there were a lot of programs during this period, of course. So there was a first wave already in March, April 2020. We are talking about November 2020 and January 2021. And these were the new programs that were enacted in this period, and there is no program before that changed this particular threshold. Okay? And I'm going to show you a bunch of results on sales, profits, expenses, and so on. And everything that, once I showed you euros, I'm inserizing my results with 5%, 2.5 in both tails. We also show that 1% or 10% doesn't change anything. We are trying to avoid. It's not working.
It's okay, just keep going.
Should I talk with the microphone? Okay. Yes.
Sí.
Debo hablar con.
Por Teams. Ahora lo compruebo.
Sí. Continúo, no? Should I proceed?
Okay. People are not listening, but don't worry.
I'm so sorry about that. So basically, very quickly, an RDD that I'm trying to exploit the fact that some firms were from their past communication with the tax authority, they were eligible to get this funding just by a little bit because they had a decrease in turnover in the past that was above 25%, and I'm comparing that with decreases in turnover that was slightly less than 5%. So the first thing is, of course, the no manipulation test. So this is an advanced. So what I'm showing you here, it's the Cattaneo et al. Manipulation test for the RDD. It's just a small improvement over the McCrary test that it's the econometric 2008 that started with this RDD methodology. But so what I'm arguing here is that around the threshold, so the distribution doesn't change at the threshold. So firms that had a decrease of 24.5, they could not go back and tell, look, no, I have a I forgot to mention these small, or I made a small mistake, and I'm also entitled. No, they could not do that, and I'm showing you that they did not manipulate at the threshold. And this is expected because all this information was already given to the tax authority before the announcement of this program. Okay? So this is the first key RDD assumption. The second one is that there is no pre-shock, that there is no discontinuity before the shock for other related outcomes. So what I'm showing you here is in 2019, and I'm showing you for net income, turnover, expenses, assets, that there's basically no discontinuity in all of this. And I could show you like 20, 30 or 40 or more of these curves. Okay, that there is no discontinuity whatsoever before COVID. Okay, so having said that, so let me now show you what we find, and also this is average wages, employment, so no discontinuity. So first stage. So how much money are we talking about per firm, and how many firms were eligible? Okay, so before I showed you what is the effect of this money, let me show you, well, were they getting this money or not? And is there a discontinuity at this threshold or not? And so in the first graph, I have euros. I warned I was terrible with these animals. Okay, so in the first graph I have euros. Okay. I have euros, and in the second one I have the probability of getting the money. Okay. So in euros we can see that there is a discontinuity exactly at the threshold, and we are talking about if we do the sharp specification, whereas basically I'm assuming that 100% of the firms got the money, which is not true. We would be talking about lump sum money of 5,270 euros, but conditional on receiving for the firms that are eligible, applied and got the money. We are talking about the lump sum of 15.5 thousand euros. Okay, for a small firm with 3 workers so this is several order of magnitudes the minimum wage in Portugal, which back then you are all seated. It's very different from Spain. It was just 700 euros. Okay. Then, so I told you that not all firms were getting the money. But we do see a clear jump exactly at the threshold. So basically, some firms below are getting the money. This is small payments for some restaurants that in one particular week during. If I remove them, nothing changes in my results. But there's a clear jump in the probability, but it's not. It does not jump to 100%. So, this means that more likely what I should be showing you is fuzzy rather than a sharp discontinuity. So there's an increase at the threshold. There's a massive increase in the probability of being treated exactly at the discontinuity, but it's not from 0 to 100. It's from almost 0 to 60, 70%. So everything that I'm going to show you with both specifications, and I'm going to tell you how much money, what is the effect on the outcomes per euro of money that was invested. So for the 2020, I'm sorry that you cannot see, but you cannot see that well. But the main point is that we only find, so for these major effects, we only find a discontinuity effect on net income, on profits, okay? On profits, but not on sales or turnover, sales of goods and services, not on expenses, not on assets. So how can we interpret this? So the way that we interpret that is that so firms during this period were in a massive uncertainty. So some of them got about 5,000 on average, or for those that got it, 15,000. And they used part of that money to save. They saved part of that money. And that money, if it arrives to the end of the year, it has to be communicated as profit. So this tax was the profits are paying tax. So this part of the money was kept in the firm to see there was a lot of uncertainty in this period. So part of the money was kept in the firm. So how much are we talking about? From the 5,000, if you compare the 5,000 euros, about 3.5 were kept in the firm by the end of 2021. For the firms, so again, let me try to be completely clear here. I'm comparing a firm that just by a little bit was treated with a firm that just by a coin toss was not treated at this threshold. Okay? And if we are talking about euros, so for 1,000 euros of APOIAR money, 658 was kept in the firm, was not spent in any circumstance, was kept and then it went to profit in 658 of these 1,000 euros. Okay? But importantly, so we do not see that these firms became better or start selling more. We do not see that these firms, the assets of these firms, that they invested a lot. We do not see, this is basically zero, we do not see that they survived more, at least in 2021. And we do not see that they kept more money or so on in legal reserves or other outcomes. So then what happened?
Just one question. So why how you calculate your bandwidth? I think I missed it. And why you have different for sharp and for fuzzy? I mean the difference.
Because it's a different. So it's the optimal bandwidth by Cattaneo, Cattaneo, and Tito Unique.
Okay.
And the bandwidth, yeah, it depends on the exactly when each work. So that on the fuzzy is conditional on you getting the money.
Yeah.
Okay. So they are using the fuzzy part they use as an instrument the probability that you are above the threshold as an instrument for how much money you get. Okay.
Yeah, I understand that. I'm not totally.
So one is an intention to treat, the other is an average treatment factor.
Yes, I understand that. What I was wondering a bit, like for me, I don't know the literature so much in RDD, but then I would basically kind of look for optimal bandwidth for sharp and for fuzzy, and then basically compare. But then you have always different.
It depends on the outcome.
Okay, you have to. Okay, I didn't know that. Okay. Perfect.
So I have seen some papers that basically I do a bandwidth of 25%.
Yeah.
Or I do 0.25 or whatever. We are using the optimal bandwidth for each outcome, which computationally takes sometimes a week running in the safe center. Okay. It is what it is. So what do we find for the employment? This is very different from what happens to the literature on the US, because on the US the money that was given to firms was to keep the PPP was to keep the money, to keep the workers there. Here we do not find anything, mostly because they were already covered by the other programs, by the layoff and the furlough schemes. Okay? So the money was not spent on hiring more workers during COVID or on paying them better. Surprise, surprise. We basically do not find anything. And we also do not find anything on investment in equity. So what do we find? So we find that this net income result is very heterogeneous. So here I'm showing you depending on quartiles per 2019 sales in the sharp or in the fuzzy, and here it's on productivity. So quartile 1 is the least productive, quartile 4 is the more productive. I should be more careful when we design these graphs. This is work in progress, I'm sorry. But basically what we show is that it's mostly the more productive and the firms that were selling more that were benefiting more from this program. That were more aware that they had to apply, that they were more aware that they had to, that then basically saved more of this money at the end. So this is 2021, and I'll get back to there to zoom in on a few outcomes and to try to show you. Okay, I showed you that they on average get 1,000, they save 600. What happens to the other part? So I'll get back to there. But let me show you that in 2022, We cannot yet show you survival. We only have the results for 2023 next month. But if there is no effect on survival, which could happen, it was the main purpose of the firm, was to help firms being afloat. It did not happen in 2021, but it could have happened in 2022. We still have to check that. But if there was no differential attrition in 2022, what we do find is that there is nothing happening. So they got a lot of money at the margin. This money didn't make the profit increase, sales increase, expenses, assets, and so on. So for 2022, again, labor market, nothing. And this is to show that there is some impact of legal reserves. So we show that they, in 2022, when they could pay to the dividends and things like that, they did, but that's a little bit of what we can show. But yeah, so let me go back to, so what I showed you so far is that at the margin, which is quite important in this, so I'm not making any claim very far away from the margin. I'm making a claim for a very similar firm that by a little was treated, by a little was not treated. So what did firms do with the rest of the money? And what we find is that they used a significant part of this money to pay rents. For those that had the rental payment, there was a moratoria, but this moratoria finished in June 2021. So they used a lot of this money to pay these debts that they had assumed during this period. And they also bought some office supplies. So then we go one step further and see that these are very much related with technology, software, kind of things to make them, these firms, more digital friendly. So what we find, so expenses do not decrease, do not change at the margin, but rents, yes. So we are talking about basically more than 1,000 euros spent on rents. So that the debt decreased more for firms that got the money. So they used a significant part of this money for that. So some things on office supplies, and we even go further to show you this technology part. And also in 2021, so there was the moratoria, as I said, on taxes to the state was gone, so they had to start paying taxes back. So they also use, so the state gave them money and they used this money to pay back to the state. And then this is 2021 already. In 2022, we do observe that then still some office supply here, but we also observe that the liabilities to shareholders start decreasing. So what they were doing, so during the COVID, shareholders were putting some money into the firm, were giving loans to the firm. So this money was paid back to shareholders with this money, and there were on top of it there were also some dividends. Already in 2022 you could pay dividends. So they use this money to pay dividends to the capital owner. So again, big part of the money was kept in the firm for at the end of 2021. So they were very. So there was still a lot of uncertainty. So these firms didn't know if 2022 was going to be a good or a bad touristic year. So they kept part of that money in. When the part that they already used in 2021 was mostly to pay some debt that they had assumed and that they were then forced to pay because the moratoria went to a finish, especially on rental payments, but also a little bit on tax. And finally, then we see more action already in 2021 when they have to pay this money, when they start giving the money to shareholders, and importantly, we do not observe anything related to investment. We do not observe anything related with employment. We do not observe that they start paying more to workers. We observe that when they could, they put some of this money to the capital owners, which, yes, it was part of the intent of the program, but it was not just for that. Very key here, so the probability of surviving. So this is for 2021. It seems that there is a jump, but it's not statistically significant, but it could be very important, and I wish that this was statistically significant, that I would have some headlines to say, but we are still waiting, as I said, for the 2022 report, to the 2020, we need the 2023 data to check if they were not, if these firms are not there in 2023 to say that they exit in 2022. So we still don't have it, but I hope that we can find something there. It would be, at least from the point of view of public policy, important, because that was the main goal of the program. But I don't know. So all our results are robust to a myriad of checks. So we show that if we, instead of a polynomial of degree 1, we use degree 2, we use a polynomial of degree 1. We also show that including sector 2-digit or 5-digit sectors, or including region, could be nuts 2 or nuts 3 fixed effects does not change anything. And if I include all of that together, also does not change anything. Then I also tried other bandwidths, so I increased the optimal bandwidth by 10% or I reduced it by 10%, doesn't change. I also tried, I should have here, I also tried the Imbans, the other name starts with an A, I don't remember by heart, sorry. That was before the Cataneo and Titunic. But we also tried with that bandwidth, the results on profits and rents are robust. No, you were all very kind and did not ask anything about how to cluster standard errors in this literature, which has been going through a big discussion. My impression is that, so if you read what people like Peter Hall and so on have been said, that robust is not that bad after all. But I've been using cluster perform, but there are people who hate that approach. Some of them are Colessar, Armstrong, and so on, and I also checked with their cluster standard errors, but I think that this literature has not settled yet. But yeah. As I also said, we tried insurizing with different levels of insurizing, just 1% or 2 or 5% in each part of the distribution. It doesn't change much because what I'm measuring is the effect at the margin, at the threshold margin. So if I exclude firms that are very far away, it doesn't change much. And we also showed that our results, if we in 2021 or 2022, if we make them conditional on surviving, so I'm not showing you conditional on surviving, I'm putting a 0 if the firm did not survive, 0 on sales and so on, but if I conditional on surviving, I throw them away, the results are also very similar, which is consistent with the fact that there was no differential attrition with survival effects. At least in 2021. So the next steps, so as I said, this is very much work in progress. So we are not very patiently, but we are waiting for the date on 2023. We also want to merge with Quadros Pessoal, which is a linked employer-employee data set that basically covers all workers in the country. And we want to see what are a little bit, if there is heterogeneity with respect to the education of the entrepreneur. So there is a lot of literature for Portugal with publishing Ristad and so on, showing that the entrepreneurs that are more educated, they make substantially different decisions than the ones that do not have a bachelor degree. So we also want to see if that plays a role here. What I'm showing you is basically average effects, but maybe this heterogeneity is quite important. And again, you are also very kind that there are other programs that were implemented before. So and there were good for us. There were many surveys. They are not representative of firms, but they covered like 60-70% of all the firms in the country. And we'll try to use these surveys to show clearly that there was no change in eligibility for other types of public support schemes on layoff or on the moratoria or on the credit restrictions for these firms at the threshold. And we also still don't have it because all our results are from a safe center and it takes a lot of time. But we of course have to show you some heterogeneity with respect to sectors. What I can tell you from the first results is that it seemed that while wholesalers and retailers are very much the same story. For example, for hotels, what we find is that they used a substantial part of the money to give back to clients that had already paid for that reserved rooms, and so they gave them discounts and they gave them vouchers for them to use in the future. And we do observe a big effect there, but I still need to put the table there. And that's basically that. Thank you so much. If you have questions, I'm more than happy. This is very much work in progress.
Thank you so much, João. And
I was wondering if you know what's the long-term probability of bankruptcy at any given point of the loss of the previous year distribution, and if it's fundamentally different for the year 2020, right? And what I'm getting at is perhaps this was just either too stringent or too generous, so it's like maybe the policy would have had an effect if it was closer to a more historical kind of critical point where...
So in 2020, the exit rate was lower than in previous years. The entry rate was also lower. And this is basically because so there was all these schemes of public money to keep business, so they tried to froze the economy for a while, so that vaccines could work. That was the main idea, basically. So yes, it's a very untypical year, so we hope, but it's different in that sense. I don't want to claim that it's not.
No, it's all fine. It's just thinking like if the policy was so ineffective, like trying to think like maybe the threshold is just very off of where, like maybe the threshold would work in another...
The threshold was designed so that mostly they could cover up to 50%. So the 25% was, so they looked at, I talked with the people that decided on this, and they basically told me that they did an histogram of this, and they see, well, more or less on the middle is 25%. It was in fact 23 or whatever, but it's 25 looks neat. Public policy in a nutshell.
So yes, well, so one thing is that I don't know how, but probably it's how do you control for self-exclusion from, because people apply for these, yes, but there are many people that didn't apply not because they didn't fulfill that, and so this is something that we don't know why. And the other thing is that it's interesting what you tell about future work, about taking into account the education, but I think that it's not only the education, but the seniority, in the sense that probably if I were in 2020 running a restaurant, and probably it's my first restaurant and I opened 1 year ago before, probably I had no experience. But if I am a person with 10 years experience, probably I can cope better with that. And probably it's not necessarily the level of education. And we can treat, yes, we can treat seniority as experience or informal education or something like that.
So on the second point,
yeah.
it's well taken.
Yeah.
I have to think more about that. But we also do not have startups.
Mhm.
So we are not talking about a business that started in 2019,
Yeah, that is.
because the rules are different there. But point well taken. I have to think more about that. The first point, the question about why do people that are eligible to get funds or to get support do not get it in the end. It's like one of the most interesting in economics, in my opinion. I think there's a lot of literature looking at the several programs in the US, and even sending letters and information schemes and information provision experiments. So why are these people not doing it when it's a free lunch in the table for them? Yes, I completely agree. So that's why we try to be very careful in presenting you the intention to treat. That's what the government can. So some people argue, and I'm in that school. It's what the government can influence.
Mhm.
They cannot force you to take it. They can inform you, blah, 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 but that's the intention to treat. But I'm also showing you the sharp, which in many papers in this literature they show you the first stage in the appendix, and then it's not that different from ours. And I think it's very important. Yeah, we are talking about two different parameters that are very important, both of them. I'm still in the school that the first one is it's maybe not the most precisely estimated, but it's the one that the government can influence from the point of view of public policy. But please.
Your results may be affected by the fact that there are other policies during the COVID cost period.
So at the margin should not be affected. At the margin this should be exactly the same for a firm that got a drop of 24.9% and a drop of 25.1%. At the margin they should not be different. From what I can show you in 2020 and in 2019 they are not different. That's the continuity assumption. What I'm telling you is that I can take one step further by looking at these surveys and clearly show you that this is not the case. We still need to merge. But it's also not, it's 60%, 70% survey of the firms, but there's a lot of, this is administrative data, so this is all firms. But in these surveys, there is of course sample attrition and sample selection. But I can do a little bit more to try to convince you that that is not the case.
Okay. No, João, congratulations on outstanding work. I just want to clarify if I understood well. So when you have the FUSI RDD, you estimate the average treatment effect. If you have heterogeneity in the individuals, so you will be estimating in reality the local average treatment effect, right?
It's an RDD. It's for sure local average treatment effect.
Okay.
It's everything I'm saying is local to the threshold.
Then you have to look for sources of heterogeneity that are related with the enrollment in the program, right? So, well, maybe you can see if there is a correlation of that with, for example, if we have traditional industries, maybe traditional industries are not innovating enough, maybe are not so informed about the policies, or maybe the kind of firms, for example, we expect that a firm of lawyers will be more informed about the innovations and the public policy than, for example,
or a firm with an accountant,
agriculture or something like that, or
a firm with an accountant, or a firm that does the accounting work for them. I would love to have that variable. I don't have. Point taken. Yes, definitely I could at least show you that the sectoral composition is not different at the margin. I think that's a fair point. I'll have it in the slides next time.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.